Hi, I'm Jerry the Snake Man, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 14 of Snake Clips. Today we're going to talk about two issues that sometimes go hand in hand, and that's snake mites and shedding. So stay tuned and we'll teach you how to deal with both of them. I was once asked by a snake keeper why his snake was in his water bowl. I says, well, there's possibly three problems that could be happening. Number one is your enclosure too hot, because snakes will go into their water bowls to cool off. I said, the other problem might be is your snake going into a shed. Do you notice if his eyes are blue or his color is dulling out? Because when snakes go into a shed, a lot of times they'll go and they'll soak in the water to help loose the skin up. And the third thing I said to them, I said, well, have you looked in the water bowl and have you noticed any black dots in the water bowl? And she said, yes, actually we have looked in the water bowl and we did see those black dots. I said, well, those are mites. And let me tell you how to get rid of them. So we're going to tell you today how to deal with the mites. Snake mites are probably one of the most misunderstood parasites in snakes that you are going to find. There's a lot of folk cures out there that don't work. There are a lot of cures that do work that are very dangerous though for the snake. And what I'm going to show you today is the way I've been treating snake mites for the last 30 years. It works wonderfully. It works except for on very large snakes. It might take 2 or 3 doses, but normally it works the first time on all other snakes. Having a large collection and dealing with outside snakes outside of my collection, sometimes I'll pick up snake mites and I will bring them into my collection and I'll have to treat over 100 snakes. This is a method that I've used and it works every single time. A lot of people will say, no, don't do this, do it a different way. But again, I'm not here to argue with anybody. I'm just here to tell you what works for me and pass this on to beginners who may want to try this. It's definitely a safe way. I've never lost a snake or injured a snake by doing it. One of the myths about snake mites is a lot of times people will say, oh, I got it in the bedding, the mites came in the bedding, or the mites came in on the rodent that I was trying to feed the snake. Well, in both cases, this is probably not the case. Snake mites are specific to snakes. You really don't get them on many other reptiles. They do not come in on the bedding. What does come on bedding sometimes is mites, but they're white mites and they're bedding mites, and they actually are harmless to the snake. And all you have to do to get rid of those is simply wash out your enclosure and change the bedding that's in there. A lot of people think that mites come in on rodents. Well, again, rodents can carry mites, but they're not snake mites. The snake mites will not come in on rodents unless you are buying your rodents from maybe a pet store that's trying to feed snakes who have mites, and then the snake refuses to eat, so they throw the mouse back into the enclosure with the rest of the mice. You happen to come in, buy that particular mouse that has a snake mite on him, bring it home, and your snake ends up with mites. But that is very, very far-fetched and probably will never happen. So they don't come in from the feeding animals that you're going to use. They don't come in from the bedding that you're going to use. They only usually are transferred from other snakes. Now, if you go to a pet store and you handle their snakes, or you go to the reptile expos and you handle snakes, many times they may have snake mites on them. And if these snake mites crawl on you, these mites actually then could be transferred to your collection when you get home. If you purchase a new snake, you want to keep it in quarantine away from your other snakes until that you've found that that snake is free of mites and any other type of diseases. Then you could bring it into your collection. Adding a new snake right into your collection who possibly has mites is going to probably infest your entire collection. So you want to keep a new snake in quarantine. Another myth about snake mites is that the fewer scales the snake has, the more damage that the snake mite will actually do to the snake. This is totally untrue. Snake mites are unique in the fact that they actually have to have pressure on their back in order to feed. So if you see a snake mite crawling on top of your snake, the snake mite is not bothering the snake. It's not draining blood out of him. But once that snake mite crawls and wedges itself under a scale, then that snake mite can start to feed. Normally you'll find snake mites around the eyes. You'll notice the eyes look a little bit puffy. Around the heat pit labias, again, it's a place where the snake mites usually like to go. Also the cloaca, they'll usually find them down there because these are places where the snake mite can embed himself into the snake, have pressure on his back, and will be able to feed. That's why snake mites are specific mostly to snakes, because most other mammals, reptiles, and of course people don't have a place normally where a snake mite could have pressure on his back so that he could drain the blood from you. People ask, well, do snake mites transfer diseases? Yes, they do transfer diseases. They are bloodsuckers. They can do that, but generally what happens is a snake mite will drain the snake down. He will drain his blood. He will weaken his immunity system, and he will cause the snake to be acceptable to more diseases and to get sick, causing him to be a weaker vessel. The average life cycle of a snake mite is 7 to 16 days. They survive best at 77 degrees with a humidity of 50%. They will breed in the tank. They do not breed on the snake itself, and they like to climb up high. So the snake mites actually on the snake aren't the ones that you're trying to get rid of sometimes. You're really trying to kill them in the enclosure. Now, most treatments you'll find will kill the mites but will not kill the eggs. So that's why you have to use something that lasts for at least 30 days, or you have to do a second treatment. The snake mites also do not like to breed or will not survive very well if they are under constant lighting. So if the lights are kept on 24 hours a day, this will also help to decrease the amount of mites that are in your tank. But you really don't want to do this either because it also stresses out the snake. It's also false that snake mites are hard to eliminate and that they can produce thousands of eggs. Most of your snake mites, the female mites, the male mites, they live only for 40 days and they can do so without eating. But after a female is impregnated, she will lay 20 eggs in about 5 to 6 days. Again, when you do the treatment, you want to make sure that the treatment you're using kills the eggs, or you want to make sure that after approximately a 2-week period, you retreat the enclosure so that the new mites that hatch will also be killed and no more eggs will be laid. Another myth is that the mites will spend all their time on the host feeding. Again, this is not true. The host is a place where they will feed, but they will crawl off of the host and they will go into the enclosure. The enclosure and in the bedding and up in the top part of the plastic rims around some of the enclosure tanks and stuff is actually where the mites will go, and that's where they will breed, and that's where they will lay their eggs. They love to climb up into the higher parts where you can't clean. So again, you're going to need something that is going to be aromatic, that is going to be able to get up into these cracks and crevices and kill the mites, especially the eggs as they hatch, so no more eggs would be able to be laid. Some people ask why snakes in the wild aren't treated for mites and why they don't have any problems. Well, one of the best treatments for mites is actually for a snake to shed. You see, a snake can put himself into a shed if he needs to get mites and ticks removed. What happens is, when a snake is infested with mites, he will put himself into a shed. Once he sheds his skin, all those mites are on the exterior of that skin, and he will crawl out of that skin, and that skin will be laid back there, and he will crawl away from it, and the mites will stay with the old shedded skin, and the snake will be completely mite-free. Why doesn't this work in captivity, though? Why, it would be the same principle, you would think, except for the fact when a snake is in captivity, he's in an enclosure. So as he sheds and he crawls out of his skin, the mites stay with the skin, but the skin is still in the enclosure with the mites, the snake is still in the enclosure with the mites, and the snake will just get reinfested with these mites. Okay, one of the ways that I keep my snakes to be able to shed without having any problems is that I like to use my totes as enclosures. The thing with totes is they keep the humidity up inside the enclosures very well, and it helps the snakes to shed with no issues whatsoever. Now in this tote right here, I have my breeding pair of Amazon tree boas. Normally I wouldn't keep two snakes together, but that's why I have two in here now. And I'm going to very carefully try to reach in here and pull out, without getting bit, the shed that one of my snakes did. I believe it was the male. And when I pull the shed out here, hopefully I'll pull it out without breaking it. Yeah. And what I do is I can see now that with the shed here that he had a very complete shed with no issues whatsoever. The reason I know is I'll make sure that the tip of the tail here came off, which it did. And I've already looked at the snake beforehand, so I know his eye caps came off. But we can unravel this shed. This is a complete shed, and this is basically how a snake should shed in one solid piece and not little bitty pieces. And sometimes they roll it up like this, which makes it kind of hard to unroll. But you want to make sure that the eye caps and all the head pieces come off. Okay, fortunately I don't have any snakes that are having shedding issues or in a shed right now. But if I did, we'd say this corn snake here has going into a shed and was a problem shedder, or he went through a shed and he didn't shed off like he was supposed to. What I'll do then is I'll take a container such as this, a nice Rubbermaid container. I will fill it up with approximately an inch and a half of water. And it's tepid water. It's not water that's too hot, and it's not water that's too cold. It's water basically that feels a little cool to our touch. I will put the snake in here, put the lid on, and I will lock him in here so that he can't get out. I'll leave him in here basically overnight. The next day when I come here, I'll open the enclosure back up. I'll reach in and I'll get the snake. Now if he hasn't shed at all, and he has to have all his shed, then what you'll want to do is you'll want to restrain the snake behind the head. You'll want to very carefully take your fingernail and start right by his mouth, and you'll start just to pick at it just a little bit, and the shed should start to pop off, at which point you'll do the same to the upper mouth, and you will then pull it back very slowly, making sure that the eye caps and everything come off. And once it gets down past his neck, a lot of times I can just take my hand around the snake and allow the snake to crawl forward just like he's doing right now, and the shedding normally will stay in my hand, and the snake will crawl completely out of my hand as he goes all the way down to his tail here, and he will crawl right out of his shedding in my hand. If I have to, sometimes I gotta watch if pieces break off. Again, I can simply take my fingernail and gently scrape it off and then peel it like a sunburn to make sure that all the shedding comes off my snakes. It's one of my pet peeves that none of my snakes, regardless if they're a cobra or if they're a corn snake, have any sheddings left on them. And I will do this process with every single snake because I don't want my snakes to look unhealthy. Okay, and this is what happens usually when I open up an enclosure like this. I'm going to take out the corn snake again, And I'll go to pick up my corn snake, and I'll be holding him, and I'll see here, and I'll look, and I'll go, oh, I'll see something crawling on him, and I'll see a little black dot. Now, the next thing I'm going to do personally is I'm going to yell at myself. It's like, how did I end up getting snake mites again? I hate these things. That's just me. Usually I yell loud enough. My wife knows that I got snake mites and I have to treat them again, because I get very upset when I get snake mites, because they do transfer very quickly throughout your collection. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to isolate him. I'm going to put him somewhere where he cannot infect other snakes, and I'm going to check the snake tanks enclosures that are very close to him to make sure that the mites have not already traveled to them. But it's really not that difficult to get rid of the snake mites, though. The first thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to personally treat the snake. Now, the way I just showed you how to get rid of the shedding issue, I'm going to do a little similar thing. I'm going to take my snake, and I'm going to take the same container I had before with some water filled into it, and I'm going to take my snake with all his mites and stick him in here, and I'm going to let him soak in that water for a few minutes. We'll set him back over here, and then I'm going to treat his enclosure. Well, the first thing I have to do is I have to get rid of his water bowl. I can't have the water bowl in here while I treat the enclosure, because the water will get poison in it, and I don't want the snake drinking it. Now, I'm going to look in the water bowl, though, and I'm going to see that there's little black dots all over there, because the snake is smart enough to know that when he gets mites, the one thing he can do to try to alleviate these mites is actually to drown them. So you will find him in his water bowl. So a lot of times people will come in, and again, they'll ask me, why is my snake constantly in his water bowl? And it's like, well, check in the water bowl and look very closely and see if you see any little black dots in there. Because if you do, those are snake mites, and that's why he's in the water bowl. He's trying to get rid of them. The other way I'll notice, though, if there's snake mites, is like many times I'll handle a snake, and after I'm done handling a snake, I will check my hands very closely, and I will look for any little black dots that might be moving. Now, these black dots are not going to bother me, but it is a way I can say and tell that there's snake mites on the snake that I was just handling. So what I do here is I like to use these tubs as enclosures. They work very well. And it really does give very limited places for snake mites to hide in these type of enclosures. But if you use tanks like I have here, these tanks have these black edges, and these black edges is where the glass sits down into, and the mites can get up underneath these edges where you cannot clean no matter how hard you try. So the best snake remedy that I have ever found was when they came out with a product that was called Prevenamite. Prevenamite is terrific. All you have to do with Prevenamite is, I don't even have to change what's in here, but normally I do. I'll put fresh bedding in, I'll wash the enclosure down really good. But after I put the bedding back in here, I will spray it with Prevenamite, and I will spray it until it is damp. Then I will let it dry, usually about an hour. I'll keep the snake and the water bowl out of there for that hour. If I do have anything like hides or anything like that, I will keep them in the enclosure while I spray it. Prevenamite actually is an aromatic type of killer, so it will be able to get up underneath all the edges around the tank. It will also be able to get up and underneath the scales of the snake, so it will also kill the mites that are on the snake. Well, I live in the great state of New York, who decides that Prevenamite is not allowed to be used in New York or sold, so I can't buy it in New York. Now, if I sneak over to Pennsylvania, I can buy it, bring it back, and I can use it, but I don't do that. Prevenamite is a little expensive, usually runs you anywhere from $25 to $30 for a can. Well, somebody figured out, who was paying attention, that this here product, which is RID, is the exact same formula as Prevenamite and works the exact same way. This can of RID only cost me $5. Okay? And this is RID, and it's right on the can. It says Home Lice, Bed Bug, and Dust Mite Spray. This is what you use to spray on your bed sheets if you get head lice. This works extremely well. Just works like Prevenamite. Again, if you follow the way I'm going to tell you, I've never had a snake injured or hurt by it. What you're going to do basically is you're going to open up the can, You're going to shake it up really well, and I'm not going to spray this because fortunately right now I don't have a mite problem. But I would spray back and forth through the bedding, and I would do this back and forth a couple times until I would see that my bedding is a little damp. Then I would let it dry. It takes about an hour for it to really dry really well. At that point, now, this is treated for 30 days. As I told you before, though, basically every 2 weeks, the mites are going to start to hatch eggs. So what I like to do sometimes is at a 2-week period, I like to reapply the Prevenamite or the Rid spray, so that now when those eggs hatch, because this spray will not kill the eggs, it will kill the mites. But once those eggs hatch and those little mites start to come out, the spray is going to kill them and they won't have time to breed, and then your mite problem is gone. So what I tell people is after you do this, put your snake back in here and please stop looking for the mites. You'll drive yourself crazy, okay? They will all die. I've treated my entire collection, which at some point has had, everybody has had mites. I treated every enclosure one time with Prevenamite, and that was it. I didn't have to retreat, and all the mites in my collection were gone. Now, what I like to do, though, is I like to now take my snake, which has been soaking in his water here, and it's an hour later, so this is all dry, and my snake's been soaking in his water, and he's a little wet. And I like to take a white towel or a white paper towel, and I will take the snake, and the first part they don't really like because you do have to get up by their head, but I will wrap the towel around the snake's head, and I will force the snake, to move forward through the towel, and I will hold the towel very tight on him, and I will just pull this towel all the way down to the end of the snake's tail, just like that. And then I will take my snake and I will put him back in his enclosure. And I will look very carefully now on this towel. Now, because he didn't have mites, there's nothing here. But normally when he does, this whole towel is going to be filled with mites. So I take that towel and I take it out and I throw it outside in the garbage, because I don't want to leave it in a garbage can in my snake room where it might infest my snakes again. Now that he's in his enclosure, his water bowl, though, I leave out. I don't put that back until tomorrow because I don't want the water to be infected by any of the aromatic things. If you put it back a day later and you notice there's like a film on the water, take the water out, change it again, clean it really good, because that is the spray that's killing the mites, and it's got into the water and you don't want him drinking it. But like I said, I've done this process. I've never had any issues with it whatsoever, and it works every time. The only time I had to actually double treat a snake was when I had a 16-foot albino Burmese, and understandably, such a large snake in such a large enclosure, I had to treat him twice, and that eliminated the mites on the second try.